7th and 8th grade, welcome to week number 4. We are continuing our conversation about worldviews. Last week, you guys explored the worldviews of generations. I loved reading some of your interactions with people from different generations. Now, you might have been wondering, why did we do this? Why did we go through the effort of tracking down people of different generations and asking them some of these questions? Well, last week we talked about worldview tension, and specifically the tension that comes between generations. And I shared with you the big dangers that churches experience because generations don't choose to get along. And that led to people actually leaving the church. Now, the first and perhaps most important step that we can take to lessen the tension that comes from between different generations is to respectfully listen. Only if we really listen can we receive advice, can we show respect, can we care for them, and can we enter into those intentional discipleship relationships. Hey, again, just want to give you a great thumbs up. You did an excellent job working through last week's project. This week, we're going to shift gears just a little bit, where we first discussed these soft worldview differences, such as generations. We're going to be focusing in on hard worldview conflicts. When I say soft worldview differences, I mean differences that could lead to awkward interactions, maybe some strained relationships, or even some distance. The hard worldview conflicts that we will spend the next 2 weeks talking about have, in the course of the history of the world, led to wars, led to sharp separations between groups, and in our worldview lead to a difference in location as far as eternity goes. The different worldviews that we will talk about are the 6 worldviews that we started off this spring talking about. We will discuss Christianity, Islam, New Spirituality, Secularism, Marxism, and then eventually postmodernism. If you forgot what some of these names mean, then that is completely okay. We will cover all of this in the next few weeks. But before we dive into this week's content and kind of recap the bare basics of Christianity, I'd love to remind us of something we talked about earlier this school year. We define worldview as how we understand, explain, and view the world around us. Now, worldview, we said, is best seen in our choices and is made up out of individual ideas that together create this worldview. We also said that all ideas have consequences because they eventually come together into action. I'm thinking about being hungry, and so I eventually get up and get a snack. I'm thinking about how cool it would be to get stronger, and so I join a gym to lift weights. In class, we talked about examples of good worldview consequences. For example, Christian hospitals started with the good idea that Christians are commanded to care for their neighbors. Also, the first schools were started with the good idea that Christians are called to train up the next generation and introduce them to God. But sadly, our world is filled with bad examples of worldviews as well, where people took seemingly harmless ideas and turned them into these terrible worldviews. 2 extreme examples. The bad idea that one race is superior than the other led to the worldview that empowered Hitler's Nazi Germany. Or the bad idea that Muslims are called to establish a religious state that led to the expanse of ISIS. Terrible worldviews. It started with terrible ideas, but here's the catch. Humanity is not strong enough to know what idea will lead to what worldview. So to take again the extreme example of Nazi Germany, if people would have known that Hitler's ideas would lead to this world war that was responsible for over 75 million deaths, I doubt anybody would have voted for him in 1933. And God tells us in Proverbs all over the place, but specifically Proverbs 4 verse 23, that God holds us responsible for what comes out of our hearts. Now, do you also feel that we're a little bit in a lose-lose situation here? On the one hand, we cannot see where our ideas will take us, but on the other hand, we're responsible for our worldview outcomes. Now, that would be totally unfair, except for the reality that God has given us a compass that we can use to guide us to good ideas with the good consequences and away from the bad ideas that lead to those bad consequences. Now, perhaps you've heard of a theologian by the name of R.C. Sproul. He died just a few months ago. But he spent much of his time thinking and writing on the idea of who God is and how he relates to our life. And one of his books is called The Consequence of Ideas. Let me just describe a passage in there on this topic. We mentioned this towards the end of our time before spring break. But here we go. He says the metaphor of light is helpful. In our present earthly state, we are equipped with the ability to see. We have eyes, we have optic nerves, and so forth, all the equipment needed for seeing. But a man with the best eyesight in the world can see nothing if he is locked up in a totally dark room. So just as another source of light is needed for seeing, so another revelation from God is needed for knowing, and that revelation is God's Word. Our friend R.C. Sproul argues this: it is only possible to really know what is right and what is wrong in the arena of worldview if we hold it up to the truth of God's Word. That is why the Bible is the foundation of everything we do here in class. That is why we spend time talking about proofs for the Bible, and that is why we will hold everything we discover about other worldviews up against the light of God's Word. Now remember what we started each worldview class with this school year. God is God, and we are not. We need his help to understand if something, from a small idea to a developed worldview like Islam, is right or wrong, and why it is. In the words of Israel's most famous prophet, Jeremiah, he wrote, "Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is fully in the Lord. He is like a tree planted by water that sends out its roots by the stream. He does not fear when he comes, for its leaves remain green." I hope that you guys will be convinced and encouraged that worldview stability only comes through trusting in God's Word and using it rightly as we weave our way through the different worldviews that believe very different things than what God's Word teaches us.